My name is Scott Morrison. This is our Boom session, and I'm absolutely passionate about impact. That's what my business is all about, is how do we help people create impact? And right now it's even more important, because what I'm sick and tired of hearing is people talking about the new normal and everything's going to be great and we're all waiting for this stuff. And there are some fantastic people out there who I really believe are creating the future. And one of those people is our guest this evening. And we are absolutely honoured tonight to have such a wonderful guest, because not only is she an international jet setter, but she's pretty much, I think, in between Formula One Grand Prix and is with us in the country for a very, very short amount of time. And as is typical, I always read this bit so I get it absolutely right. But tonight we are absolutely blessed to have the incredible Ellie Norman with us live from her home. And it's even more of a pleasure because this is, like I say, one of the only few nights where Ellie is around and available. Ellie leads the global marketing and communications for all of Formula One, and she joined the management team following the ownership change in 2017. And she's been the first ever director of marketing and communications. Her aim and her brief is to sustainably grow the fan base, the viewership, and the race attendance. In fact, she's been given an incredible remit, and that incredible remit is, in the words, reimagine the future of Formula One. And frankly, I can't think of anyone better for us to talk to this evening in us helping and shaping the future of sport than Ellie. So Ellie, welcome. Can you hear us? Welcome.
I'm in.
We can hear you.
Scott, fantastic. Can you see me though?
We can't see you, but we can see your wonderful ranking shot photo.
Well, that's always a good one.
Absolutely perfect. So we can at least see that picture. We managed to get you on and your video on. That'd be absolutely perfect. But I have to say, first and foremost, thank you for standing by. But we've had loads of really interesting questions, and in the short moment that we had some technical things to work through, I did say to the audience who were waiting, it'd be great if they came up with a really good question, and the best and most brilliant question I would ask first as a kind of a thank you for people for holding on. And so I'm going to do that, if that's okay. So the first question, Ellie, that we have is actually from Martina Andrita. And she says, hi, I'm a female motorsport journalist, and I would love to know Ellie's opinion on working in motorsport as a woman. So that's our first question. So go straight in.
Straight in.
From Martina, who's a journalist in motorsport.
So I think first and foremost, it's about being passionate. And when you have a passion, I think you obviously want to sort of do anything to create a situation. Now, are we in fully?
I've got you. I can actually see.
Amazing, amazing. Should we start again, Scott?
Yeah, that bit again.
So it is certainly from my perspective, if you want to get into motorsport, it's about being passionate and finding opportunities where I think you can kind of add value. And certainly from what I've seen, motorsport is such a tight-knit community that it's really often quite hard to get in. But where I see people succeeding is certainly kind of coming in and adding value and actually demonstrating where you have a skill that can actually help existing sort of journalists within that community. And particularly sort of the breakthroughs that I've seen is when new journalists have come into the fold with a different perspective, the ability to actually create content, take it into podcasts, into kind of video to really sort of support the more traditional sort of press format of journalism as well.
Brilliant. So the first question I actually had for you, of course, because this was last weekend was a very momentous weekend for quite a number of reasons. Most notably, of course, Lewis Hamilton equaling Michael Schumacher's 7 world titles. Is that right? 7 world titles.
Yeah.
And actually today on the power list being recognised as the most influential not just black man, but black person in the UK right
Yeah.
now. What is it? What does Lewis Hamilton bring to your sport, and what's the impact he's having?
He is an incredible asset for our sport. He's first and foremost a phenomenal athlete. The dedication that he puts into being the absolute best, the time that he spends with his team. And I think what's incredible is you have a team that has remained relatively unchanged throughout the duration of those kind of 7 World Championships, and they work tightly together. They have a great internal culture that allows them to learn from mistakes and to get better together without there being a blame culture. And fundamentally, as a sort of person, from what I see, he is just a very kind, humble, generous human being. And I think what's been particularly powerful this year is to see his focus to change something that existed for hundreds and hundreds of years in terms of like systemic racism, and recognize the power of his platform and what he's achieving on track as a way to essentially unlock and to bring about behavioral change. And I think that's really welcomed for the sport, and it's something that we've spent a lot of time kind of discussing with Lewis and sort of internally within our organization, because it genuinely starts with listening and learning, and then actually kind of working together as allies to bring about the change that we want to see, and to create an environment and a future that people want to be a part of because it's reflective of society.
Excellent. I mean, I love what he's done. I love what he's done, not just for the sport, but I just love what he stands for and what he represents. Yeah. One thing he said at the end of the race on Sunday, which was really powerful, I think he said something like, "This is for all the kids out there who dare to dream, dare to dream." Yeah. I just thought that was incredible. How does, what's the car? I know actually I watched your Instagram feed and you take loads of photographs of the car and everything else.
Yeah.
What was the atmosphere like in there after all of that?
It's it was such an incredible race. I would have loved to have had sort of hundreds of thousands of fans there, but it was incredible because there was so much jeopardy on the kind of racetrack, and Lewis and the team had kind of struggled with the kind of tires, and yet seeing it all come together and him actually kind of fighting it. And I think what was really sort of incredible was actually seeing and listening to him on the radio say to his engineering team that are trying to get him to come in and change it, pit and change his tires because the weather radar is saying this and the rain's going to come and your tires are kind of gone. And he's there as a driver going, "I've got this. I can feel where my tires are at. I'm calm. I'm as one with my sort of machine. I've got this. Let me take it across the line." And I suppose the kind of physics and the engineering was saying, "No, come in, kind of change it." And that for me is like a perfect example of where man and machine work together to kind of really push it to those limits. And when he sort of did that, and he kind of came in, I mean, the tires were like the intermediates where
slicks.
Yeah, they were slicks. So there was like no tread left on. It was phenomenal drive. We as a team had prepared various sort of scenarios depending on the kind of outcome of the result. And so there is a sort of a relief and a joy that you actually get to sort of put your plan A into kind of motion around the kind of podium, the sort of interviews. And it was just incredible to almost remove myself as the marketing person and to almost kind of put myself back into the frame as a human being watching history being made, and just sort of actually seeing the positivity and the overwhelming kind of emotion come from Lewis in this sort of reflection that he'd done it. and just the sheer sort of admiration and I think love from the team to him and vice versa. And I think despite the competition within Formula One, the just the absolute kind of respect for how he drives and what he's achieved from all of the other teams and the drivers themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's just fascinating to see. I mean, obviously watching him grow, and then, you know, he's a grown man now, and it's quite weird when you see that transition. I was reading all the stuff about him at the weekend, and I've found it absolutely fascinating that he is now literally telling his pit crew and his team what he's going to do, and some of the other drivers really struggled with that actually in the race. And but what I want to go back a little bit actually, Ellie, if we can, and of course you've got this incredible remit to shape the future of Formula One. But before we get into that, because we'll get into that in our Unblock, Unlock, Unleash element of the show, what sparked in you this massive interest in motoring? Because I've known you for years. I know your career, your love of cars. But what sparked it, and what brought it all about, and how's that sort of grown through your career to where you are now? In fact,
from a young girl, so I grew up on a farm, and so from a young age there was always machinery. Now, clearly not the fastest machinery on the planet, because we're talking kind of tractors and ATVs and like combine harvester. But I've always loved driving and knowing how things work. And I just love speed. And, you know, from wanting to learn to drive from the earliest age possible and sort of messing around under the age of 17 in the kind of fields and stuff, into learning to drive, I've always sort of had that love of cars, and from a young age would sort of do your typical Sunday Formula One and then a Sunday lunch. And then actually, truthfully, I stopped watching or following sort of Formula One from the late 90s, kind of like early 2000s, and it was no longer kind of really relevant to me. And my passion remained much more within sports cars, and actually the sort of form and function of how that comes together. And it wasn't until coming back and working in Formula One that I've sort of really rediscovered it.
Brilliant. And I think let's think about what's obviously just happened. We've just had this kind of massive, well, we're still in the middle of it, right, in lockdown 2. And this is part of what inspired the show. In fact, you were one of the very first people who when I was doing my Stay Boom mini motivational speech, you were the very first one. You know, you gave such great advice and some, you know, wonderful sort of thinking. But let's go back to when COVID struck. Obviously, you are a business that is all about live spectator sport and about people mingling and everything else. What were the kind of conversations that were happening when COVID hits? And at what moments did you galvanize the team to move from inertia, I guess, like, or what do we do, to no, we need to do something? What was happening?
As I kind of look back, so we're here now and we're kind of in November. As I look back, it genuinely was the most surreal moment in time. I was on the other side of the world, so I was in Melbourne, Australia. It was Thursday, the 12th of March, and I remember being at a state governor welcome reception. She's a phenomenal lady, and we have it every Thursday night, and she welcomes the F1 community, Linda Desil. And my phone went at 10 p.m. to confirm that we had a positive COVID case within the paddock, which was later confirmed to be a team member of kind of McLaren. And I was there with Ross Brawn, and we went back to the circuit. And my boss, our CEO, Chase, was actually flying from Vietnam, so we had no contact with him. And over the space of, I was up for 48 hours, and over that space of time, it was a kind of quick succession, a domino effect, that we essentially had the race cancelled on that Friday morning after kind of being up through the night with the sort of health authorities, the ministers, state governors, as well with our own kind of team principals and teams. And you then had the news coming in, NBA cancelled their season, NFL, it was just like sports stopped.
Yeah.
And the first kind of priority was Chase got off the plane Friday morning, and it was literally, Chase, please may you come straight to the track versus going and changing. And it was to communicate to fans. We had fans queuing at the gates to come in on Friday morning for F1. And it's awful having to cancel an event with kind of people there, but it was very much thinking about clearly the safety and security of sort of everyone, and COVID was so unknown. So first and foremost, it was, okay, we have to get all of the F1 personnel back to predominantly the UK, Switzerland and Italy, and to do that sort of safely. Second sort of thing we then had to kind of quickly do was with a number of races being cancelled, we almost kind of looked at it as to 3 jobs that we had to do. First thing was, how do we maintain fan engagement and momentum? And you know, you've got this whole macro climate around of people being locked down, it's the unknown, and actually there's something quite powerful in being able to entertain and engage kind of fans and provide a sense of escapism. And so quite quickly it got into virtual Grand Prix, and we did our first virtual Grand Prix like 2 weeks after the cancellation of our first physical event, and we maintained the sort of salience when our physical events would have been with these virtual Grand Prix. And we did that whilst in the background working with governments to get exemptions and to put in place the most robust procedures and processes I've ever been a part of to allow governments to open their borders and allow us in as a sort of reduced community of like 2,000 F1 people to race. And so we started racing again in July. So that was kind of like the first thing that we had to sort of do. Yeah. The second thing was, we've obviously got lots of kind of partners within the sport, and it was kind of prioritizing maintaining those strong long-term relationships with our partners, so TV broadcasters, sponsors, sort of promoters, the host countries of where we race. And Chloe, who's our sort of director of race promotion, was working with Chase to sort of actually put together a calendar, because out of our initial 22 races, we've ended up with a calendar this year of 17 races, but only 3 original races stayed within that sort of calendar. And right. the third thing for us as a sport was to sort of continue to drive through the regulatory changes that has been the priority since Liberty sort of acquired the business, and that's about creating a fairer playing field. So cost caps, new sporting and technical regulations, and essentially a car that is going to be more competitive to provide that sort of racing. And I think with those priorities, one of the strong sort of enablers of building that momentum and actually coming out of the sort of paralysis was strong leadership and wisdom from sort of Chase of we're going to find a way through this, and we are going to race this year, and not accepting that we're going to cancel a season. And coupled with that, almost the sort of steady engineering mentality of kind of incremental gains and creative problem solving.
Brilliant. I mean, it sounds like it was an immense task. And of course, you know, I mean, I'm sure it was. And we're going to dig into it a little bit more, because I want to think specifically about your broader career. But what I also want to do is I want to bring in another question from the floor, because I think this is quite interesting. This is from Ben Bishop, who holds his hands up and says, you know, he really wants to get into marketing within Formula One. So there's his quick CV. But he says, well, what does a normal day look like for Ellie before, during, or after a race weekend?
Oh,
Maybe just choose one of those areas. Like, what's a standard day like for you?
So I would definitely say that no day is ever normal.
Of course.
The most normal bits of my day tends to be start with exercise. So it's been brilliant to be able to travel with our sort of exemption and to be able to use a gym. And just a quick sort of run or some exercise, personally for me, is really empowering to kind of wake me up. The common things that remain throughout my day is, as you all know, Scott, from my shed, regular hydration and making sure I'm eating. And then the bits in between will be so varied. So it'll go from the bits that will remain within our schedule, such as press conferences. We've always kind of got that, and that's kind of timed in. These sort of unknowns, particularly within a COVID world, is we have a really robust testing system. So at the moment, we are all sort of PCR tested every sort of 4 or 5 days. And clearly there is always an unknown as to whether there's going to be a known positive within that. That's going to require flexibility. So an awful lot of kind of comms will happen on the ground. Always time with the teams, which now doesn't happen as a sort of sit down meeting within a hospitality unit or a motorhome. It is outside in the paddock, kind of fully masked up and outside. And sort of very much kind of making sure that across all the teams that we are sort of ready to respond with content, social media plans, any sort of campaign activations that we would sort of have planned in and around the events, and just being sort of pretty reactive. The one thing that's changed this year is we clearly don't have guests, and so in a sort of environment where we would have guests, we are sort of bringing guests into the sort of Formula One world, and that will range from potential host countries, so they're sort of governments, through to kind of sponsors, new commercial partners, celebrities, and kind of influencers. And so it's very, very varied, but it keeps it really exciting.
So Usain Bolt, I believe, attends Formula One a little bit, of which you worked with frequently.
Yep. He came to Austin in 2017, which is fantastic to kind of get him across to kind of Austin after sort of I'd worked with him when I was at Virgin Media. And he actually sent a really lovely congratulations video message to kind of Lewis, which I've kind of sent on as well.
Wonderful.
So from one goat to another.
Well, Ellie, what we always do in our boom sessions is we run through the operating system of the boom, which is Unblock, Unlock, Unleash. And it's always interesting to hear everyone's story through that lens, because as we always say, Unblock is about what was the old thinking, old legacy stuff that was there when you joined. How do you unlock inspiration and ideas, and thinking, how do you unleash action with your teams? And where we're going to start clearly is with Unblock. But when you joined Formula One, I've got a quote here. City AM, in fact, no less, that wonderful business paper, described you as one of the future thinkers hired by Liberty Media to make the most, as they said, most of their asset. And there was a real, the thinking was that there was a kind of a traditionalist approach before that, and you were brought in to help shape and change that. So when you joined a business, and you also described it actually, I think at the time, now you would say a 70-year-old startup, because it is 70, not 60 odd years. The 70-year-old startup. So what was the kind of traditionalist approach or the legacy thinking that existed when you came in? And help us understand what you mean by a 70-year startup.
So when I kind of joined F1, it is a massive brand. And yet once you got past the brand, I mean, there is awareness of Formula One everywhere, massive interest, pretty sizable kind of fan base. We're talking of, in excess of 500 million fans. And yet inside of the organization, there was very little structure or process. There was burning, a phenomenal legal team, phenomenal kind of accounting and finance team. and sort of individuals running the core commercial elements of the sport. So host fees, broadcaster fees, and sponsorship. And the reason I sort of describe it as the 70-year-old startup, because it's part turnaround and part startup. And when I think about essentially startup, you can often, the challenge there is to scale at speed. Now we have scale, but the turnaround aspect comes from essentially having all of that kind of scale, but the startup, it comes from actually having no structures or processes in place. So there'd never been a marketing function, never been a communication function, no research, no digital, no strategy. And that's not a situation that you really anticipate. So when I had my coffee with Sean Bratches, who recruited me, he was really honest. He was like, Ellie, there's no kind of marketing in F1. And you kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. But actually, there really wasn't anything. And so that for me is the sort of startup bit of nothing existing. But the turnaround bit was you're creating something from nothing, but actually it is in full visibility of the world. And actually, when things go wrong, it tends to get noticed.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah. That's the interesting thing about having such a level of scale that comes with a whole load of expectations. And you're right, when those expectations, there's a level of difficulty in actually fulfilling them if you don't have what you need to do the task.
Yeah. And because of the sort of old structure, and Bernie has created a phenomenal kind of business, and that's through sort of sheer vision and the ability to actually pull that into a sort of a commercial sort of business from where it kind of started, which was a series of kind of teams that were out racing for fun. But when you got inside of it, culturally, it definitely felt as if it was environment that was more instructional versus a curiosity and a kind of proactiveness. And the sort of element to sort of unblock is, as you're putting those cultures together of old with new, is almost to keep asking why. Because you can often come into an environment and it's like, well, can we do this? No, we don't do it like this. Why don't we do it like this? Oh, because of that. Well, why? Because you almost have to kind of take it right back and get to a point where you say, well, it doesn't necessarily mean it can't be done any other way, or we're not going to extract value from trying it in a new way. So it's just really sort of trying to bring those kind of cultures together and to almost sort of reframe that you are now one collection of people, and we should all be sort of pointing in the same direction of how do we grow this business and make it much more engaging for our fans. Because if we don't serve the fan, we're not going to sort of actually grow the business.
Absolutely.
And that's very much kind of sort of one of those elements. And I think the other sort of element of unblocking was, when you think about Formula One, it is shrouded in secrecy. And you have phenomenal teams, but those teams are not there to share with each other. Those teams are there to be competitive, and you're in a win or a lose situation. And that's exactly what we want on track. But actually, you have to unblock the element that when we are talking from a marketing perspective, what is right for a fan, we have to think of ourselves as a sport versus an individual. And that kind of comes from building up a foundation of trust and working together versus these kind of silos. Because if we grow the sport, we will benefit from that.
Brilliant. One of the questions I always ask all of our guests, and it's part of unblocking, is helping really sort of get clarity on what success looks like. So the question I always ask is, if you were to wake up tomorrow morning, throw the curtains or your blinds or whatever, and everything was how you wanted it to be in your role, and you'd reimagine the future of Formula One, what would it look like? What would that be for you? What would it feel like?
Okay, so Scott, when that does happen, I'm going to be retired because I won't need to do my job anymore. I will be like enjoying the sunshine. I'll be like cooking all the time, and I'll be outside. And as I look back and I look into the world of Formula One, we'll be recognised for the racetrack being our test lab, and people will realise that racing is our way of accelerating progress, to benefit the real world. The power of sport would have continued to unite diverse fans across the world. We'll be racing on every habitable continent. And inside of our F1 community will better reflect the world. The sport will be thriving. We're going to have seriously competitive racing on track. The drivers will be heroes and they'll be stopped walking down the street because people know who they are. And the fan is at the heart of the sport.
Excellent.
And I don't think I'm ever going to retire at that rate.
I don't think you will be retiring. You just keep doing it. It's one of those things, you're passionate about it. It leads nicely to a question that we've got from Ria. Because I think one of the things as well is unblocking the fan base and the audience. You know, and this is just a kind of I'm an old guy now, but I grew up with Formula One. And Alan Jones used to be one of my sort of racing heroes. My dad was into Formula One and we met him and all that sort of thing. But of course, I'm the older generation. And I guess that, you know, part of the challenge of any sport these days, and this is partly Ria's question, is how do you unblock a level of engagement with that younger, they've used the term Gen Z here, you know, the Gen Z audience, because of course, like younger fans are less likely to spend hours watching one sport every week. So how do you unblock engagement with that new fan base and get them involved and engaged in your sport?
One of the sort of things when we first came into the sport, I think, as I said, like we had no research, and so we actually started with research, and to truly sort of understand what people associate with the sport and actually what the kind of barriers were. And understanding those barriers for us as a sport was the perception of being elitist, of being inaccessible, of being boring. And it was actually brilliant because you know where you're starting from and you almost know therefore what you have to do. And so for us, the first thing we sort of did was set it around sort of 5 guiding principles. And that for us was sort of be passionate about the racing, make the spectacle more spectacular, to break down barriers, and then to sort of really start to put some kind of attitude and some grit into the sport. So that was kind of very much around sort of taste the oil and feel the blood boil. And when we thought about those sort of barriers that we had to remove and almost kind of reframe it into what is it the opposite we're trying to do, when we then thought about our specific audience, the sort of break barriers was about making it accessible and relevant. And so through thinking of Gen Z, a number of kind of new touch points to access the sport. Social media, just really engaging content of getting drivers to do unexpected things, seeing the drivers as the heroes they are without their helmets on. The drivers actually talking about what else they do aside from the sport, bringing in fashion collaborations that resonates with a younger audience. So we've done 2 fashion collaborations with Bape and with Antisocial Social Club. Gaming has been huge. And so these sort of esports, getting the younger F1 drivers, they will have their own kind of Twitch channels, and actually kind of building up challenges and just opening up those channels and kind of dialogue between fans, podcasts, sort of just short forms of content, funny radio snippets, seeing the drivers kind of training, being out and doing what they're doing. Music has been a huge kind of lens in. So we've created and launched F1 tracks. So we invite different music talent to curate their own playlists around sort of every Grand Prix, or actually get them. We did a great one with Biffy Clyro, and Daniel Kvyat, who is one of the drivers. And Daniel loves playing guitar, so Biffy gave him a guitar lesson that we obviously sort of did the content and streamed that. And Daniel taught Biffy how to kind of play the game, because he was kind of getting into kind of esports and stuff. So it's that sort of multitude of different touch points, but really knowing what does that audience care about and how can we show up in a relevant way.
Great, because we're starting to think there about how do we unlock. So that's really about unblocking the audience, which is great. And within some of the great things you mentioned there, we're also touching on how you're unlocking some of that stuff. And we've got, thankfully tonight, we've got a lot of women in the audience who are involved in some way in motorsport, like you. And I know, secretly deep down maybe, that I believe so anyway, from what I read and what I know, that one of your secret ambitions, maybe not a secret ambition, was once to be the world's first Formula One female racing driver. Am I correct?
Yeah, I was 10, Scott.
Yeah, well, it's a brilliant thing. But Nicole Drought, who's one of our guests this evening, is a female racing driver, she says, and it's brilliant. And she says, I was going to touch on this as well about the W Series joining F1, and I want to just again think about how does that help unlock some of the stuff, some of the natural sort of male bias and the elitism, as we talked about earlier about Formula One as kind of old thinking. These new initiatives that are opening up, especially for women in Formula One. What's the thinking behind that? How are you helping drive that? Pardon the pun. You drive it.
The W Series launched in 2019, and Catherine, who's the CEO there, and Sean, who sort of founded it. I believe sort of Sean has daughters, and for him it was always a case of, where are these kind of opportunities for my sort of daughters? And I think it's often the way that you hear parents talking about sort of, where are these opportunities for kind of young girls, or they've kind of grown up and love something. And actually, when you look at, but I think particularly within motorsport, there tends to be a lot of father-son relationships, and you even hear sort of Max Verstappen's sister, phenomenal karter,
right,
but kind of never carried on kind of going through. And there is actually so much female talent within motor racing, and you see much more kind of equal splits of girls and boys in kind of karting. And then actually, as you progress up that racing ladder, the sort of girls fall away. And we don't know kind of all the reasons, but it will be a combination of sort of losing interest, not wanting to kind of look silly or sort of be seen to be failing. Finance plays a massive kind of part in that, and it's the W Series has sort of come about along with another of other initiatives, such as, you know, the FIA Girls on Track, to really start to put programs in place to encourage girls to continue on that sort of path through. And W Series is after its first year, I think it had a phenomenal achievement in raising awareness for where these talented women racing drivers were. And it's really important that we can use the sort of Formula One platform. And when we kind of typically look over a race weekend, you're looking at sort of 90 million average cumulative sort of viewership. So we got huge kind of numbers there. Now, to have the W Series on our calendar as a support race just really sort of helps to continue to build the awareness of that talented female sort of pool of racing drivers. They can now earn FIA super license points. So to get into Formula One, you have to have a number of points on your license. And I think that's going to provide the opportunity for these sort of women to get more seat time in single seaters, to sort of start to develop kind of racing craft, get the recognition, start sort of operating on building their own brands, sponsorship, and then actually sort of move into other series where it is kind of mixed gender. Because the interesting thing, or the thing that I love about motorsport, is there are no rules. that says you can't have a mixed field. So you have, you've got a men's football team, you've got a women's football team, and the same with sort of a lot of kind of ball sports or bat and ball sports. But actually within motor racing, it has always been open to both genders since it started in 1950. We just haven't had the pool of talent coming through. And so it's actually a case of understanding where those barriers are, and actually sort of, I think in your language, unblocking that and then sort of unlocking that. And that's what sort of now is happening with getting these kind of programs up and running to really sort of identify that talent.
One of the great things that you've, I think, been instrumental in unlocking as well in Formula One, having done some work with you as well, is certainly the concept of the content that sits behind Formula One as a really powerful way of engaging the audience. We've had a couple of people talk about how amazing. So Davey Diamant, and also who we got here, maybe Jeff. Sorry, yes, Jeff. Both saying how brilliant the Netflix content was, The Drive to Survive, and how it's actually helped engage them more and their families more in Formula One. Tell us how that kind of inspiration for that kind of thinking comes about, and then how you make those things happen.
You know, if you go back to sort of the magic of Formula One is maintaining the sort of aspiration and this sense that we are this circus that travels around the world, and it's phenomenal logistics. People often like, how does it kind of happen? And you've got the most incredible characters within the sport. And actually, when we go back to one of our jobs is to kind of break down barriers, no one gets to see backstage. It has been shrouded in sort of secrecy, so no one could come into the paddock. You know, this is lockdown. This is nothing you ever kind of saw. And the beauty of the kind of Netflix series is actually just having a film crew travel with us and to literally film what is happening. And they have access, particularly in kind of COVID, where we have put film crews into teams' bubbles. So they're dressed as a team, they're eating with the team, they're in the same hotels. It is literally just getting under the skin of the sport and into rooms and hearing conversations. And it's a drama series. And, you know, when we're engaged, it's generally because it's just phenomenal, powerful storytelling. And there's jeopardy, and there's kind of characters, and there's highs and there's lows. And I think that is what Netflix does fantastically well. And it's really shone a light on the characters that you would not normally see. So yes, there are 20 drivers on track, but backstage there's a whole sort of team that people are now much more familiar with. And it's just been so powerful. Sorry, Gunther.
Is it Bono?
Oh, Bono. Yeah.
I'd never even heard of him before, but now he's suddenly become very, apart from U2 singer, but he's become very famous.
Yeah. So I mean, it's amazing, all these characters, and you can often, as a viewer, identify with a certain kind of character because there are now such a sort of variety. And so they've been filming with us all of this year. They were with us in Australia. So just starting to kind of see some of the sort of edits for where it will be broadcast kind of in 2021. But I think we've got another great season on our hands.
Wonderful. Look, everyone's looking forward to that. I can see by the amount of questions we had. In fact, Jeff even says, thank you so much for what you've done for the sport so far. So there you go. Look,
well, trust me, I am one of many making the change, but thank you.
Well, take the compliment. You're definitely making great changes. Who do you rely on as a coach, or coaches, or mentors, Ellie? Who do you speak to when you need to be inspired? Or
I've got a few sort of different places I go to. Throughout my career, I've collected people from sort of actually every kind of role, and they will continue to be sort of at the end of the phone and a brilliant support network to me. And that's from sort of starting out in my first job, agency side, and there's a guy sort of Ian there. Another guy actually at Honda, who I will still kind of regularly kind of speak to, and the words from the president at the time there, a Scottish guy, Ken Keir, I will always kind of keep sort of filed away of the only question he had ever asked me is, does it make you feel scared? And that for me was a brilliant kind of unblocker and unlocker into, you have to kind of truly feel it in your gut and actually feel a little bit uncomfortable about a piece of work before you put it into society, because we've got like thousands of stuff coming at us all the time.
Yeah.
And if something is truly going to stand out, be distinctive and resonate, it would be wrong of me to feel like super comfortable with it 9 months before it kind of goes live. And I'm talking about years and years ago when we were able to do like telly ads.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Back in the day. And then at Virgin, Keris, who's now over at the BBC. And then actually the kind of places that I always kind of go to is Marketing Academy.
Yeah.
So Cheryl in there, amazing webinars and content and powerful kind of speakers that just give you a completely different kind of perspective on things, and the Marketing Society. So that would be my sort of like core staple that I'll often sort of still go to and to get inspiration and speak to kind of people or watch content.
Wonderful. Our viewers this evening can go and check out all those websites, Marketing Society, Marketing Academy, if you are so interested, and we'll make sure that links go up if people want them. I want to talk very briefly then about just unleashing action. And you are clearly someone who gets things done. And, you know, one thing I do know about you is that you're an incredible like engager of stakeholders. So it's a great lesson for anyone listening is you can't create action unless you bring people on board. And I think it's just always great to hear from people. How do you go about bringing people on board with the changes that you've got to make, selling them ideas, selling them thinking, keeping them involved? Because you've got to do everything from, I think Jasper's asked as well, how do you keep the drivers and the teams engaged with everything that you're doing? You've got all these different people to manage. What's just a couple of tips that you might share with us, Ellie, that people could use when they've got to engage their audience?
I always approach everything with openness and actually wanting to share. So I think that openness, being approachable as a person. I never come into a environment with any stakeholder kind of claiming to have the answers or knowing what's right, but it's a case of I need other people's expertise to kind of help to shape it. And I think that that's always been sort of quite helpful in that you have a kernel of an idea, or actually there is a problem here, but I can't solve it by myself. And actually I need everyone's kind of input to be able to kind of solve that problem. So I think that really, really helps to sort of get stakeholders on board, because everyone then has a part to play in finding the solution. And then I always think the importance of leading by example. So I'm really passionate and energetic about what I do. And, you know, I want to, every interaction I have with someone, I think I've got a responsibility to add value and to leave someone feeling like joy or sort of hopeful. So like never to be a mood hoover. And I think that a collection of hopefully that does make people feel like they want to be part of something, and we can do something that's good together.
What have you been most proud of in the work that you've done in shaping the future of your sport, Ellie?
I'm really proud of rebranding the sport. So it was a huge thing to kind of tear up and start again. But I think as we look back now, and we got so much stick for it, and social media was not a kind place to look at. But I'm really proud that we've done that, because it's just amazing to now see how the brand can live in so many different touch points and still be cohesive, but sort of celebrate the differences of the countries we're racing in. I'm really proud of the journey that we started in sort of the diversification of the sport. So sort of removing grid girls from the 2018 season. Again, got quite a lot of negativity from a certain audience, but I think it's kind of largely forgotten about now. And actually removing that has really helped to unblock, I think, how women can look at the sport. And actually it's now we're able to show there are so many talented women performing a multitude of roles within the sport. And I think the removal of the kind of grid girls has really helped us to shine a spotlight on where this talent is. And this year, I'm so proud of coming back to physical racing, but coming back with a purpose. So the We Racers One sort of platform around what our sort of responsibility as a sport around sort of sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and what we do in sort of communities to leave a positive legacy has been brilliant. And it's so nice that with something so sort of simple as We Racers One, to be able to energize and get the buy-in of 10 teams to come together around something so singular as that has, for me, been kind of really powerful. And that really actually was as a result of kind of COVID, and was possible after the teams came together on Project Pit Lane and essentially answered the government's call in the UK for helping to build breathing aids and ventilators. And so we had 7 teams in the UK that were even in each other's factories. I mean, you wouldn't even be allowed in the car park from another team. And, you know, in the space of weeks, there were like tens of thousands of units being produced. And I think that really demonstrated the ability to work together across the teams. And after witnessing that, then spoke to kind of all the teams about actually this We Racers One sort of idea. And this is something we should kind of continue, because it benefits society.
Absolutely. Ellie, listen, it's been, as ever, a pleasure hearing such, you know, inspirational words, but also hearing your story, but most fundamentally seeing the changes that you are making, and they are tangible and they're real. And I think they're very well respected and received by our audience this evening. Now, of course, we're in these kind of very weird times at the moment. And I just wondered if you could give anyone who's out there at the moment who's feeling a bit stuck, feeling the load and the weight of what's happening in lockdown. And there is a message that you could give anyone tonight that would help them, again, unblock themselves, unlock the thing, and create some action. What would you say to people about, if you're stuck, what can you do to keep moving forward?
So last week, I was in Turkey last week, and I read an incredibly powerful quote, and the quote was that regret is worse than failure. And I spent some time kind of reflecting that, and I thought, do you know what, I really love that, because failure is only the fact that you discover something didn't work the way you thought it was going to work. But regret is not exploring or taking action into what could be. And I thought that was so powerful. And coupled to that, the other sort of thing I often think about is, what's the worst that can happen? Like, what is the worst that could happen? If something goes wrong, I can learn from it. Every situation I'm presented with, I have a choice in how to respond and sort of react. And for me, that's kind of holding on to how powerful it can be to be kind of bold, to take some brave decisions, and going back to sort of my president's words of just get comfortable with that feeling of being uncomfortable, and don't have any regrets.
Love it. What a great way to end our conversation. Very, very powerful statement. And of course, I'd always rather fail than have regrets personally. And this evening, we have no regrets because we managed to get all the technology to work. And you have got, there's loads of glowing comments coming in, Ellie, from your contribution. Thank you so much. People are saying thank you for what you've done for business. And also just thank you for being open and honest and sharing what you've been doing. You know, you've really inspired some of our viewers this evening, and continue to inspire with the work that you're doing. And I know that over the next few months, hopefully you'll get a nice rest from traveling. So far. You'll be able to put your feet up and enjoy your Christmas. Ellie, we'll definitely be in touch. I'll definitely be in touch with you soon anyway. Make sure that you're okay, keeping safe. We'll all be keeping an eye on what you continue to do brilliantly with Formula One. And for all the people viewing this evening, thank you ever so much for joining us as ever for our Boom session. Hope you've had a great evening this evening. I think it's been a fantastic and informative and inspirational, as Jessica Mullen puts it, I couldn't put it myself, super interesting, inspiring, and engaging session for the evening. We will have another Boom session. We're taking a break in December. We will be coming with an incredible guest again in January, and we will announce who that guest is very, very soon. Keep you on your toes as we always do, but you'll be able to obviously sign up in the usual way through our For Events page. So thank you once again, the wonderful Ellie Norman, for an inspiring, engaging and incredible insight into how you're shaping the future of Formula One. And for everybody, we will see you again in January. Between now and then, have a restful break, enjoy the Christmas season, and most of all, stay boom.